in Cincinnati this week for joint practices with the Bengals in preparation for their preseason matchup on Friday. And as often is the case with these kind of joint practices, things got a bit chippy. I mean, ultimately, a few skirmishes broke out. Elgton Jenkins appeared to be at the center of both of them. Jenkins was, working on a block where he ended up knocking a linebacker down to the ground. That linebacker, whose name I can't recall at the moment, kind of bounced back up and ended up throwing a punch at Jenkins. Things broke out a little bit. Cooler heads prevailed. Jenkins sat out a few reps, ended up coming back later. But then in the team period, another one broke out. Again, appearing to have Elgton Jenkins at the center of it. Ultimately, Jenkins ended up being removed from the practice early. Aside from the extracurricular activity, the Packers had a pretty healthy practice, with only Stokes, Gaines, Nichols, and Hansen not participating, which meant we saw the return of this guy, Josiah Deguara, from a calf injury. And remember, Deguara played his college ball at Cincinnati, so I'm sure he was, really enjoying this opportunity to return to his old stomping grounds. It was also the second consecutive practice for Rashan Gary after coming off the PUP list. Still only working in, individual drills as you see here, but, it's notable that during the team periods, he's been running a lot of sprints, really working on that conditioning. Unfortunately, we only got to see one-on-ones against each other in offensive line and defensive line drills. On the receiver and defensive back drills, we didn't get to see that. So there was no matchups of Dobbs or Watson against their DBs, or Jair or Rasul locking down Jamar Chase or T. Higgins. It's been noted a number of times, though, that the drops are starting to be a little bit of a concern for some of the analysts and reporters out there on the beat, including a few drops that would have been touchdowns, one of which I'll talk about a bit later from Romeo Doubs, and another that was a surefire dime from Jordan Love to Jaden Reed, who dropped it in the end zone. The inconsistency in the drops can stall drives, but also really kind of get the offense out of rhythm. And when people are just kind of box score scouting Jordan Love in practice, it really indicates that he's not performing as well as he actually is. The Packers and Bengals did allow 7-on-7 drills to be filmed, though. We see some of that here. One where we see just the big target that Luke Musgrave is on a stop route in the middle of the field. And then here, Christian Watson finds himself on a linebacker, and his speed is just no match. And while we didn't get to see Jair one-on-one with any of the current Bengals receivers, we see him cutting it up here with Chad Ochocinco a bit before the practice really started. I was always a big Chad Johnson fan, and one of my favorite Chad Johnson stories is how, early in his career, he effectively lived in the Bengals facility, really viewing it as a cost-saving measure for him early in his career. The real story of the day was the defenses, on both sides really, which isn't uncommon in training camp, especially early in training camp. The defenses are a little bit ahead of the offenses. Both first-team units working against each other concluded with the defenses ending up with the win. That doesn't mean that Jordan Love and company was necessarily having a bad day, though. Love did seem to start off a little slower, as has kind of been a trend throughout camp so far. But once he kind of settled in and warmed up, things started to flow a little bit better, including this deep 51-yard bomb to Romeo Doubs. Just, you couldn't have handed the ball to Doubs any better. And ultimately, Doubs was targeted a handful of times deep like that, but was only able to bring in that one. Another one Doubs dropped that would have been a likely touchdown. And then the last one, if memory serves, was an errant throw by Jordan Love. The one really big kind of major mistake that Love made today, which generally he's done a pretty good job protecting the ball and, not putting it unnecessarily in harm's way. He seemed to make a poor read pre-snap on this, smoke screen that he ended up throwing. It likely was a called run, but he liked the look pre-snap and decided that he was going to, dart it out to the smoke screen. Unfortunately, he effectively threw it right to Mike Hilton, who would have likely taken that back for a pick six. That's one play, though. generally speaking, throughout camp so far, you can count on one hand how many interceptions Jordan Love has thrown. So I'm not panicking about that at this point. It is something that, like he can hopefully take in, internalize and really learn from that and not make that same kind of mistake and read moving forward. Even if it turns out that, he does make a similar read like that in the future, but then he spots it before he releases that ball. If he has to take a sack, that's better than giving up essentially a pick six from what was within the 10-yard line. So that's a big 14-point swing in a real game situation where we're effectively taking 7 points off the board of our own and giving 7 back to the opposing team. So let's look forward to this preseason game on Friday. What should we be looking for and really be watching from the Packers? I expect that Jordan Love's probably going to play, no more than a quarter, maybe 2 or 3 series, and then they'll pull him out of the game. After that, I think they'll probably give a good number of snaps to Sean Clifford, as really he's the more developmental quarterback that's going to probably need those reps a bit more. Alex Magoo may, prove throughout this course of the preseason that he's a little bit more advanced than Sean Clifford right now. But I think they're still going to lean towards the side of giving the younger, more developmental quarterback those reps in the preseason. Along the rest of the board, another big one that I'm looking at is that offensive line group. Who is shuffling where, especially as, we're not going to see David Bakhtiari out there. We're probably not going to see Elgton Jenkins. So does that mean Yash is going to start out at left? I mean, you don't want to be putting a liability out there with, your first time starting quarterback, in limited reps in the preseason. So I expect, Nyman will probably start at left tackle with, Tom on the right tackle. But how long are they going to play someone like Zach Tom? Are they going to give him some additional reps at center, after that first team unit goes out, and will he be effectively the second team center for a while? Also on the offensive side of the ball, really like that running back 3 position. Both Gutekunst and Matt LaFleur have gone on record essentially saying that third running back position is going to come down to catching ability out of the backfield, blocking, and special teams. They're not as concerned with the dynamic runner. But I still think someone like Tyler Goodson, if he can hold up semi-well as a pass protector and find some utility on teams, even if that is, potentially as like a number 2 returner or something to that effect, I think he has at least a dynamic enough ability to force them to keep him as running back 3. As we look at the receiver position, who's going to get a bulk of the snaps throughout the preseason? Where is that cut line essentially of guys who are, surefire roster guys, Watson, Dobbs, probably Toure in that group, and then even Reed. So is Wicks going to kind of be that guy that takes a big bulk of the snaps along with, Bo Melton, Malik Heath, Jadakiss Bond, and so on and so forth? Or are we going to see more Jaden Reed than you might expect? These are the things I'm kind of curious about, at least on the offensive side of the ball. On the defense, I'm really curious. Granted, I expect them to kind of show out, especially against this Bengals team, because the Bengals do have some, great weapons on offense. I don't expect them to play much, if at all, especially since Joe Burrow's down too. So it's not going to do, Jamar Chase, Tyler Boyd, T. Higgins, those guys, a whole lot of benefit to be out there with the number 2 quarterback. So I think they're probably going to ease back. So really I'm expecting our defensive unit to go out there and dominate the Bengals in this first preseason game. So that's one thing I want to see. I want to see, these young guys along the defensive front really wreak some havoc as well. The Colby Woodens, Carl Brookses, even Chris Slayton out there, who can bring in some juice on that defensive front. And then what's the safety position battle going to look like? Who's going to get a lot of snaps in the preseason to really kind of solidify that starting spot? We've seen Savage has kind of been the mainstay there, even though he hasn't He hasn't really done a whole lot to flash so far in camp. But we've seen Rudy Ford, Jonathan Owens, Tarvarius Moore all take reps with that first team alongside Savage. Are we going to see a good rotation of those three? Are we going to see a mix of different combinations of them to see who ultimately is a good pairing together? These are a few things that it would behoove the Packers to, I think, mix and match and see where the chemistry is within that safety group. Who is communicating better and who really builds that cohesion and that trust with their counterpart in that defensive backfield. But hey, we've made it this far already. We are just so close to football being back, seeing meaningful snaps, granted not in the scheme of, wins and losses, but meaningful in determining who is ultimately going to be on this 2023 Packers roster. And I'll be here to follow up with some of the analysis of what we see on the field on Friday.